The room went silent when Marcus leaned across the table and told me my work was basically pointless. People stared at their screens, pretending not to hear the humiliation landing squarely on my shoulders. I walked out that day carrying a cardboard box, but he never realized I was also carrying something far more powerful, something he had already depended on without understanding it. If you've ever been dismissed by someone who had no idea what you were really worth, subscribe and tell me in the comments. The real story starts after they thought I was gone. The quarterly review had already dragged on for 2 hours when Marcus finally strolled in, acting like he was doing us all a favor by showing up. He didn't sit. He hovered behind the chair across from me, arms folded, wearing that smirk people get when they think they've already won a fight you don't even know you're in. The fluorescent lights above us flickered just enough to make the room feel even more hostile. My coffee had gone cold, but I held the cup anyway, trying to ground myself while the tension settled over the table like dust. Marcus opened a thin folder and didn't bother hiding the dramatic sigh he'd been saving. "Amina," he said, as if the name itself annoyed him. "I've been reviewing headcount, and honestly, I cannot figure out what exactly you do here." There wasn't even a hint of curiosity in his voice, just performance. A couple of analysts shifted in their seats. No one looked at me. That was always the first sign something ugly was coming, the silence of people choosing safety over solidarity. Marcus kept going, pacing now, tapping the folder against his palm like a judge preparing a sentence. "We have entire departments doing what you supposedly manage. Systems run themselves these days. Automation should have made your role obsolete years ago. So why?" He paused, savoring the moment. "Are we still paying you a 6-figure salary?" It wasn't confusion driving him. It was the thrill of cutting someone down in public, the thrill of proving power in a room full of witnesses. I explained calmly that I oversaw Flowmatrix, the optimization engine coordinating every warehouse, driver route, and order sync across 3 states. He waved it off instantly. "The logistics thing. Right, but it's automated, which means it doesn't need a babysitter." A few people pretended to reread their notes. One cleared his throat. Someone's phone buzzed in the hallway, a tiny reminder that the world outside this humiliation kept moving. I kept my voice steady even when my heart kicked against my ribs. "The system requires oversight, daily adjustments, database updates when carriers change APIs, fallback routing during peak hours." "Sure," he said, cutting me off with a shrug. "Stuff IT can handle, if they even need to." Then he smiled wider, the kind of smile people wear when they're about to twist the knife. "The metrics look great, smooth as silk, which means either you're not doing anything or what you do doesn't matter." My phone buzzed on the table. A message preview flashed. "Devin from HR. I'm so sorry. The paperwork just came through." The sting landed first in my stomach, then surged upward, tightening my throat. Marcus straightened his tie like a man ready to deliver a rehearsed monologue. "We're restructuring," he said. "Your position is eliminated effective immediately. Security will escort you out after this meeting." He opened the conference room door as if the discussion were over. "Nothing personal, just business." People stared at their screens harder than before, desperate not to be caught looking at me. That was the moment everything inside me went still. Not broken, just still. Because Marcus had no idea what he'd just touched, no idea what he'd severed, no idea what my removal would trigger. Quietly and inevitably, the moment I walked out of Atlas Flow's doors. Security met me at the doorway before I'd even pushed my chair back. The guard wasn't rude, just apologetic in that tired way people get when they've escorted too many employees out of too many conference rooms. He handed me a cardboard box like it was part of a script he no longer believed in. My co-workers avoided eye contact by suddenly becoming deeply invested in spreadsheets that hadn't mattered 5 minutes earlier. It's strange how fast a place you've given years to can turn into a stage where no one wants to be associated with the person being pushed off it. I walked through Atlas Flow's open office, past the rows of standing desks and fake plants, past the break room where I'd eaten 1,000 rushed lunches, past walls covered in motivational posters about teamwork and innovation that felt like insults now. The humiliation wasn't loud. It was quiet, suffocating, the kind that presses against your ribs from the inside, the kind you feel more than you hear. At my desk, the guard set the box down and stepped back with practiced distance. I packed slowly, deliberately. Framed photos, notebooks filled with diagrams no one else could decipher. A chipped ceramic mug from a warehouse team that once thanked me for saving their workload during a winter storm. My backup drive. A jacket I kept draped over the back of my chair during long nights when deadlines stacked up. Everything personal went into the box. Everything owned by the company stayed exactly where it was. People love to talk about professionalism during terminations, but professionalism evaporates the second someone in power decides you are no longer convenient. My hands didn't shake, but something colder settled in my chest. Not anger, not yet, just clarity. Marcus thought he was eliminating an expense. HR thought they were closing a simple personnel file. What none of them understood was that eliminating my role wasn't just removing a name from a payroll spreadsheet. It was severing the license agreement that kept their entire operational backbone running smoothly. Years ago, when Atlas Flow hired me, I had insisted on adding a specific clause to my contract, a clause small enough to escape attention, but significant enough to protect me if the company ever tried to claim my work as theirs. Flow Matrix, the system they depended on for routing, scheduling, warehouse coordination, and predictive load balancing, did not belong to Atlas Flow. It never had. I had built it long before I ever walked into this company, using my own time, my own hardware, my own frameworks. When they hired me, they didn't buy Flow Matrix. They leased it, conditionally, tied explicitly to my active employment. No employment, no license, no system. And just because Flow Matrix ran quietly didn't mean it ran blindly. I had designed it with a verification trigger, a simple heartbeat mechanism that checked for authentication every morning. A verification only I could provide. A verification that would stop arriving within hours of me leaving this building. But I didn't think about any of that while packing my things. Not consciously. The understanding lived deeper than that, almost instinctual. When Marcus fired me, he thought he'd removed dead weight. He thought he was the one ending something. In reality, he'd started a countdown he didn't even know existed. I signed the last HR form at the front desk, handed over my badge, and stepped outside into the gray Seattle afternoon. The air smelled like rain rolling in from the sound. For the first time that day, I took a real breath. Behind me, Atlas Flow's glass doors closed with a soft hiss. A door shutting on my old life. A door opening on a new one they couldn't control. What they had set in motion would reveal itself soon enough. That first night after leaving Atlas Flow, I didn't do anything dramatic. I didn't scream into a pillow or pace the apartment or draft some long, cathartic email I'd never send. I heated leftover pasta, curled up on my small couch overlooking Elliott Bay, and tried to convince myself that the hollow ache in my chest was just exhaustion. My phone lay face down on the coffee table, buzzing every so often with messages I didn't check. I knew who they were from. HR always tries to soften their own missteps the moment they realize a termination isn't as clean as they assumed, but I wasn't ready to engage. Not yet. Instead, I opened my laptop and logged into my private dashboard, the only window into Flow Matrix that still belonged entirely to me. The system was running perfectly, just as it had every day for years. Trucks moving, loads balanced, warehouse workflows smoothing themselves into quiet efficiency. That was always the irony. The better a system works, the more invisible its architect becomes. Atlas Flow never understood that the operational harmony they took for granted wasn't magic. It was oversight they never bothered to learn about. Flow Matrix's verification ping was set for 5:30 a.m. every morning. A simple handshake, nothing flashy. But without it, the system followed the rules I'd written long before Marcus knew my name. A 36-hour grace period, then a controlled shutdown. They still had time before anything broke. Time they didn't know was slipping through their fingers. Around 9 p.m., my phone rang, an unknown number. I let it go to voicemail. A minute later, a text arrived. "Amina, this is Devin. Could you please call me? We need to finalize paperwork." Devin wasn't the enemy, but he wasn't my responsibility either. I closed the message without replying. The next morning, while making coffee, I refreshed the dashboard again. Flow Matrix was still humming, orders flowing, transport grid stable, but the clock had already begun its silent march toward the deadline. At Atlas Flow, I imagined Marcus walking through the office with that same inflated confidence he'd worn when firing me, completely unaware that the foundation beneath his operations was already shifting. I almost laughed at the thought. How often do people destroy the one thing keeping their world upright, simply because they never cared enough to understand its value? By noon, the calls became more frequent. First HR, then someone from operations, then an unfamiliar number with an out-of-state area code, probably the outside counsel they kept on retainer for situations they were too arrogant to anticipate. I let every call ring out. If they wanted something from me, they could wait until they realized what they had lost. The first sign of panic arrived Friday at dawn. 3 missed calls from Devin, 1 voicemail from Marcus that began with forced patience and ended with a sharp edge he couldn't hide. "We need access credentials," he said. "It's urgent. Our team can't adjust routing parameters." Already? I checked the dashboard. Flow Matrix had sent its ping at 5:30 a.m. No authentication, which meant the internal pressure was building faster than I expected. It wasn't failing yet. The system wouldn't collapse until the end of its cycle. But cracks were forming. Their operations team was discovering the limits of their knowledge. And Marcus, who thought automation meant invisibility, was about to learn how much work it truly took to keep an empire moving in the right direction. The countdown was still running. The grace period wasn't over, but the unraveling had already begun. The moment it happened, I wasn't even looking at the dashboard. I was out on my balcony, wrapped in a blanket, sipping coffee as the early morning fog drifted in from the bay. The world felt quiet, suspended, as if holding its breath. Then my phone buzzed with such insistence it broke the calm clean in half. First one call, then another, then 3 more stacked on top of each other so quickly the screen froze. I didn't answer a single one. Instead, I set the phone down beside me and finally opened the dashboard I'd been avoiding. Flow Matrix's interface, usually a tapestry of humming logistics activity, was gray. Every operational node dimmed. Every warehouse link offline. Every route planner idle. A single line of text blinked across the top. Authentication failure, system lockdown initiated. That was it. No dramatic alarms, no blinking emergency lights. Just silence, the kind that follows a massive operational heart attack. Flow Matrix had officially shut down at 7:03 a.m., precisely according to the parameters I wrote years ago. I imagined the scene inside Atlas Flow in vivid, painful detail. Managers scrambling to figure out why orders weren't syncing. Supervisors discovering every automated process they relied on had frozen. Drivers sitting beside idling trucks, waiting for routes that would never arrive. Warehouse leads shouting over each other because pallets that should have been on the move were now stacking up with no rhyme or reason. People always say, automation is the future. They never talk about what happens when it stops. At 7:16 a.m., Marcus left his first voicemail. His voice carried the strained politeness of someone trying very hard to contain panic. "Amina, we're having some technical issues. If you could call me back, we'd appreciate your insight." Technical issues. That phrasing alone nearly made me laugh. At 7:42, he called again. The politeness was gone. "You need to give us access now. The operations team is locked out. Warehouses are at a standstill. We can't reroute anything." He didn't say please that time. At 8:10, the third voicemail arrived, and the panic had sharpened into fear. "Do you understand what's happening? We have trucks sitting idle across 3 states. Our clients are demanding updates. We can't even process basic load requests. This is a critical failure." I let each message play out in silence as I ate breakfast, the sound of his unraveling becoming a kind of dark soundtrack to the unraveling of his certainty. The calls kept coming. A dozen by mid-morning, HR operations, a number I knew belonged to Atlas Flow's legal team. Not one of them seemed to realize the truth. The collapse wasn't emotional. It was structural. Marcus hadn't fired an inconvenience. He had severed the operating spine of the company. And because he never cared to understand what kept his system stable, he also didn't understand how thoroughly he'd ensured its fall. By late morning, news must have leaked internally. I received texts from former co-workers, half curious, half terrified. "Everything's down. They're blaming IT. Did you know anything about this?" I didn't answer them either. At 11:32 a.m., Marcus tried again, his voice cracking around the edges. "Amina, I am begging you to call me. We need this fixed immediately. We're hemorrhaging money. Every hour this continues, we lose more." Begging, the bow. Same man who'd smirked as he told me I didn't matter less than 2 days earlier was now pleading for my help. But this wasn't about revenge. Not really. It was about accountability. Choices have consequences, especially choices made carelessly, arrogantly, and in public. I looked out at the gray water, calm and endless, and finally picked up my phone. Not to call him back, just to listen to the 7th voicemail, the one where his voice finally broke under the weight of what he had done. The collapse was complete, and the reckoning had only begun. By early afternoon, the voicemails had shifted from panic to something closer to desperation, and that was when I knew it was time to take control of the narrative. I waited until the next call came in, Marcus again, his number flashing across my screen like a reminder of everything he still didn't understand, then declined it and sent a brief text. Email only. If he wanted help, he would follow my rules. Within minutes, the email arrived, a fumbling mix of formal language and frantic subtext. "We request immediate administrative access to Flow Matrix. Our internal teams are unable to restore functionality. We need your cooperation to prevent further operational disruption." I could almost see him sweating over the keyboard. I read it twice, not because I needed clarity, but because I wanted to fully absorb the shift in power. Yesterday, I had been the expendable employee he dismissed in front of a room full of people. Today, I was the only person who could stop his company from imploding. I answered with a single line. "I can assist under a consulting agreement. My rate is $120,000 paid up front for a temporary 20-day license." No apology, no explanation, no softening. His reply came 4 minutes later, a rambling attempt to negotiate. "This figure is far beyond reasonable. Perhaps you could provide read-only access instead. Our team can handle the rest." That line almost made me laugh. Their team couldn't even change a routing table without me. They certainly couldn't revive a locked system. I responded just as simply as before. "The fee is not negotiable." And then I closed my laptop, letting the tension do the work for me. As I made tea, my phone buzzed again, this time with an email notification from someone I didn't expect. Jordan Reed, VP of Strategic Operations at Redline Distribution, Atlas Flow's fiercest competitor. He'd seen the quiet update I'd posted the night before. Open to new opportunities. His message was short, confident, deliberate. "Amina, we've been hoping for a chance to work with you. If you're available, I'd like to talk." The timing was perfect in a way I couldn't ignore. One company was falling apart because they didn't value me. Another was already extending a hand because they did. I replied immediately. 15 minutes later, Jordan and I were on a call discussing what a transition might look like. He didn't treat Flow Matrix as an afterthought or a cost. He treated it as vision, strategy, the very thing that could catapult Redline ahead of every competitor in the region. And he treated me not as a replaceable cog, but as the architect of something powerful. By the time we hung up, he'd asked for a follow-up meeting and hinted at a leadership role. The contrast was almost jarring. Marcus saw me as overhead. Jordan saw me as infrastructure. I returned to my inbox, and as if on cue, another email from Marcus appeared. "We accept your terms. Please send documentation and your availability." I stared at the message for a long moment, letting the weight of it settle. Yesterday, he'd tried to erase me. Today, he was ready to pay 6 figures for a fraction of my time. Power had shifted, not by force, not by revenge, but by the consequences of his own arrogance. I drafted the consulting contract, sent it to him, and closed my laptop with a calm I hadn't felt in months. It was time to walk back into Atlas Flow, not as an employee, not as a subordinate, but as the person holding the only key they had left. Walking back into Atlas Flow under a consulting contract felt surreal, not because I wanted revenge, but because the contrast between who I had been and who I was now was impossible to ignore. 2 days earlier, Marcus had smirked as he dismissed me like a line item he couldn't justify. Now, when I stepped into the conference room, the same one where he'd announced my elimination, he couldn't meet my eyes. His posture had changed, shoulders tight, voice thin. He passed the signed agreement across the table with a hand that trembled just enough to betray how much pressure he was under. But I didn't linger on him. I focused on the work, on the task he'd effectively hired me to perform: restore flow matrix, grant temporary access, step away, nothing more. I entered my credentials, waited for the system to re-authenticate, and watched the room react as their phones began ringing with warehouse alerts announcing restored automation. Operation staff exhaled like divers coming up for air. Someone in IT actually slumped forward with relief. None of them asked how the system worked or why they couldn't manage it alone. They didn't dare. I walked out as soon as the job was done, the consulting fee already cleared in my account, and headed straight to my meeting with Jordan at Redline's headquarters. If Atlas Flow was a company built on old habits and complacency, Redline was the opposite: lean, curious, aggressive in the way successful companies have to be when they're hungry for growth. The moment I entered their modern glass office, I felt something shift inside me, a sense of possibility. Jordan didn't waste time with pleasantries. He wanted to know everything about the newest version of Flow Matrix, the ideas I'd never been allowed to build at Atlas Flow, the innovations I'd kept in notebooks because Marcus didn't believe the system. Needed oversight. He saw value where others saw cost, vision where others saw complexity, and he didn't just want Flow Matrix, he wanted me to lead its evolution. Over the following weeks, while Atlas Flow limped along with temporary access to the old system, I began rewriting its successor from scratch. The new architecture, Flow Matrix X, was faster, smarter, more adaptable, built for the future instead of patched together to survive the present. Redline's engineering team treated me as a partner, not an accessory. My ideas weren't questioned out of ego, they were expanded out of respect. Every day I worked on Flow Matrix X, I felt myself reclaiming something Atlas Flow had drained from me slowly over the years: the belief that what I built mattered. Meanwhile, Atlas Flow's operations struggled despite the restored system. Their managers were confused, their clients impatient, and Marcus increasingly frantic as deadlines slipped. They had the software, but they didn't have ownership, and they certainly didn't have understanding. And on the 20th day, right on schedule, the temporary license expired. Flow Matrix shut down again at midnight, quiet and absolute, as if it were simply obeying gravity. Marcus called me within minutes, his voice raw, pleading, offering concessions he would have laughed at a week earlier. But desperation comes fast when a company realizes the person they underestimated is the person they cannot function without. I didn't rush to answer him. My time was no longer theirs to claim. The future I was building had already begun, and this time, I was building it somewhere that actually deserved me. Marcus's voice cracked when he called after the second shutdown, and even through the exhaustion in his tone, I could hear the realization settling in. He had pushed out the one person his company couldn't function without. He offered everything I'd once asked for at Atlas Flow: resources, authority, respect. But offers made out of survival aren't the same as offers made out of belief. I named a rate higher than the first, and though he protested, the truth was undeniable. If Atlas Flow wanted Flow Matrix back, even temporarily, they would pay for it. They did. Another wire transfer hit my account, this one larger, more desperate, stripped of all pride, and I restored the system again just long enough for them to breathe. But even with automation running, their decline had begun. Clients drifted toward Redline, attracted by the early successes of Flow Matrix X. Analysts took notice of the performance gap. Warehouse teams talked. By the time my second consulting term ended, Atlas Flow wasn't negotiating anymore. They were bracing. Marcus tried one last move. He asked to buy Flow Matrix outright. I didn't need to think about it. "It isn't for sale," I said, and meant it. Flow Matrix was never just software. It was the sum of every late night, every idea dismissed, every moment I'd been underestimated. Selling it to the man who didn't believe in it, or me, would have been the real betrayal. Atlas Flow declined to renew the license again, and without guidance, without understanding, without respect for the system that kept them afloat, they collapsed into manual operations. Red lines surged ahead. I became VP of Infrastructure Innovation, leading a team that saw the value in every detail I shaped. My world expanded, theirs shrank. Months later, I heard Marcus had resigned after a disastrous quarter. Someone forwarded me his farewell post filled with lessons about valuing talent. I read it once, closed it, and moved on. Because the real victory wasn't watching them fall, though they did. It was standing somewhere they could never have taken me, building something better, stronger, and entirely mine. Looking back, what stays with me isn't the shutdown or the money or even the promotion. It's the quiet strength I didn't know I was carrying until someone tried to take everything from me. When Marcus fired me, it felt like the floor dropped out from under my life. But beneath that fear was something sturdier. The choices I'd made long before he ever said my name. The clause I fought to include. The documentation I kept. The care I put into building something that could stand on its own. People like Marcus never see quiet preparation as power. They see it as passiveness, compliance, something forgettable. But that hidden strength, those small, steady steps I took years earlier, became the reason his world unraveled and mine finally opened. The truth is, I didn't win because I fought louder. I won because I had already protected myself long before anyone tried to test me. Quiet planning isn't glamorous. It doesn't get applause, but it gives you something far more valuable: choices, and the freedom to walk away when someone tries to decide your worth for you. If I could tell a friend one thing, it would be this: don't wait until someone pushes you out to realize how much power you already hold. Put the foundations in place now before you ever need them. When the day comes, you won't have to scream. You'll simply stand up and walk toward a life they never imagined you could have. How to get started today. Write down the work only you understand. Save proof of your contributions. Review every contract you sign. Fight for the clauses that protect you. Build skills outside your job so no one company owns your future. Keep records of decisions, approvals, and your role in them. Prepare quietly. Let time turn preparation into leverage. What moment taught you that you were stronger than they ever realized?